Okay, the meeting's being recorded. Wow, I guess the Zoom update, they don't announce that anymore. Learned something new this morning. I did also, if you want, set my settings to Dutch, if that's helpful. I don't know if it comes through and the translation is good, or if you don't want to worry about it, but I did do that just in case anybody wanted it. Okay, let me go back to sharing my screen. Okay, and I'm going to just quickly check the chat. Make sure there aren't any questions. Good. I think we're okay to go. All right. So today, throughout the session, we're going to share videos of school leaders from 5 different schools that have been implementing here in Arizona, who have launched their Next Education Workforce teams. And we're going to share a lot and give you insights into some of their learnings. At ASU, we are known, and actually we were just voted again #1 in innovation. We move very fast. We move with a lot of innovation, and we wanted to make sure that we brought those school leaders who are out in the field and who've already been doing this model to the training, because we think their insight and perspectives is incredibly important, and they've lived and breathed this model. So we also want to make sure nobody repeats the mistakes we've made on our side, so that you can also learn from some of the things we've learned along the way, and hopefully we can learn from your implementation as well. So we will really get started in today on, how you're going to be designing the next education workforce, or Anders Organisation. I never say it correct, but Suzanne's giving me an okay. So by the time we're done working together, I will be semi-fluent in Dutch, okay? At least I can pronounce it. So why are we here? One thing about this Next Education Workforce is going from kind of the teacher being holder of all knowledge and distributing that knowledge to students, and to really looking at distributing that expertise around students. So you can see on the left-hand side of the screen, we are moving from one teacher that is responsible for, especially in elementary, language arts, geography, social studies, music, science, math. In the United States, there's over 179 standards that teachers have to be mastered in at the elementary level. And it's just simply not possible for people to have that breadth of knowledge and that depth of knowledge, even at the early elementary grades. So we began to look at this and think about how could we revise the model. Many reforms, including the one I worked on previously at ASU, really focused on what is the teacher is the problem. How can we fix the teacher in education? Let's provide more professional development. Let's provide new curriculum. Let's provide new leadership. But we've never really looked at the model of the school system that's evolved globally since the Industrial Revolution. And we've realized that one of the reasons teachers are leaving the profession, at least in the United States, is the job's too big. There's just too much to cover with all the socio-emotional needs and all the other components, social media, home life, social life, et cetera. It's just become too much for teachers. And content has also expanded to where they have to know a lot more content than we did in the past. We're now teaching computer literacy. We're now teaching social emotional learning. So variety of reasons why we needed to rethink this model. And so we needed to figure out how to tap into the educator's expertise. And one of the things we looked at was the collective expertise of the teachers at that school. And how could we move from the one teacher, students being wrapped around the teacher, to teachers actually being wrapped around the students. So that's the shift we've begun to make. So in today's session, we are going to go over the 6 sessions we provided schools in the United States that did the Launchpad over the winter and fall. And they are a series that are kind of designed to help you cover all of the major bases that we have experienced in our implementations. We're going to start today with identifying your why and who might be on the teams at your school. Those of you that came to Arizona last April, you're going to get a little bit of a repeat from session 1 and session 2, but I think that's okay, because what we are also doing together is building that common knowledge and that common language, so that you can build a system that makes sense in your context, as well as makes sense across schools and working as you're networking this work together. We're next going to go into how you're going to identify your vision for deeper and personalized learning. As we've moved teachers into teams, one of the core components of why we've done this is really to hit those two components, allowing teachers to provide deeper learning and content areas, as well as personalizing that learning for students across the board. And we feel teaming is a way that really can help teachers rethink how to do that. Now, that then leads into some other things we need to think about at the school level. So we will also take time to think about how you build the master schedule around this. When we implemented this here in Arizona, we had quite a few shifts we needed to make in scheduling, how teachers were used across grade levels, et cetera. I know in the Netherlands, you also do job sharing. So that's something that will probably come up for you in your master scheduling. But this is a piece that schools had to rethink and look at very critically and very creatively to rethink how they could shift things. But I think we'll get prompted with some really good ideas of what schools here have begun to think about. Then that also leads us to thinking about the learning spaces for our students as we're teaming teachers together. And so we'll talk about how we are creating shared and flexible spaces for learning. Those that were able to come here, we actually have some photos of the classrooms they visited, but we'll give you a sense of some of the other schools in the Valley that are also doing this model and the range of how they're creating shared and flexible spaces, from very no cost examples to very high cost examples. And then the next thing you need to really begin to think about is creating those structures and systems of support that support the teams. We will suggest as we get into this that you maybe think about, starting small with piloting this model at your school, maybe with one grade level. And as you're thinking about who might do that, you also need to think about then what's that support system that needs to come behind that lead group, just to make sure as they're experiencing bumps and challenges and successes that they feel supported and that they know that their challenges are learning opportunities for everybody, because they are going to be your lead learners. And then finally, the last thing we want you to help think about is how you create communication structures that support teams, how you communicate this model to your community, how you communicate this model to your teachers, to your students, things we took into consideration and the schools took into consideration as they begun to engage in this work. Because as you can imagine, getting a letter home as a parent that your school has completely changed its structure could be very upsetting if you weren't given time to give feedback, get insight, learn about it. So we were very strategic in how we worked with schools across the board. So we'll go through all this today. And I hope this will give you a really good foundation for you to begin thinking about the beginning of your implementation. So at the end of today's session, we're hoping that by the end of today, you will have a really good idea on how to identify those launching teams, set that vision for how you're going to think about deepening and personalized learning at your site and how you're going to explore that. Looking at that draft schedule, looking at that plan for the existing space and how you might use the space at your sites more strategically or more creatively, thinking about how you will combine classes together, how you'll share those rosters, what does that mean for other staff at the school, and also drafting that communication plan. And to help you with all this, we have developed a document that is a strategic plan for you to follow. So we will share this with you so that you can also begin to work on all of these elements with your team members at your sites and really begin to dig into this work very strategically. So to get you ready, I wanted to give you a chance and let me just see here a second. I need to stop sharing and get the link. But I wanted to give you a chance to look at the elements of our Next Education workforce, which are in either you can scan the QR code that's here, or in the chat, I put a link to the Google Doc But on our website and with this document are the kind of the core elements of the next education workforce models. And I wanted to give you 5 minutes just to open them up, begin to look at them, familiarize yourself with some of the vocabulary I'll be using, some of the content, some of the concepts, and then we'll continue. So I'll give you until 25 after the hour to look at these documents, take a minute, just kind of absorb them, familiarize yourself with them, then we'll come back together. Any questions? Okay. Okay, hopefully you got a chance to kind of look through some of those documents. And as you probably noticed, there's team level elements, school level elements, and then system level elements. And we've really tried to think about the model at these three different kind of benchmarks so that we can really define what the teams need to be doing, how the school needs to be supporting, and also what the system needs to be thinking about along the way. And again, I want to emphasize, we did not come up with this overnight. This took us 5 to 6 years to really think through. So I encourage you to enter this with a really open mindset and be ready to, really think through. Even setting up this meeting, we ran into some challenges thinking about, okay, who needs to be included, who's not, and this is all part of the learning. You're going to find that I'm going to be very flexible with you because I know you're kind of figuring it out as you're moving along. That's what we had to do as well. So this is all part of the process, but we're here to help. So wanted to let you know that we're colleagues in this work together. So today we're really going to focus in on those school level elements, which is what you'll really be designing from the school level. So thinking about how how you're going to prepare for that educator autonomy, the staffing and the hiring, for the extended teams and the core teams, the coaching and support for the individuals doing this pilot, what resources need to be thought of, the schedules, having that innovator's mindset or approach, and really thinking through change management. All of those are going to come into play as you begin to think through this. And that's why we brought those elements together. So again, to go over our session agenda, just to give you a sense, I want to let you know, we're probably, what's most helpful for you to know here is we're going to probably work in about 45-minute sprints and then take a break, and then 45 minutes more, take a break, and we'll kind of go through that together. And like I said, I probably won't have you get into the documents and planning as much as we did with our teams, because I think that's something you're going to want to take back with some of the other educators at your sites. But we will make time for you to talk together and think through this as you're learning the material today. I'm going to pause. Are there any questions or anything okay so far? Okay. All right. And then just session norms. Keep yourself on mute if you're not talking. Keep your video on if possible. I recognize this is an odd time of night for some of you, so do what's comfortable at your location. Please participate in the Zoom chat and the polls when we offer them, as well as we say, speak your truth. This is a time to ask questions. It's okay to disagree with things or have, thoughts, concerns, or really be excited about something. So this is the time to kind of begin to air it and think about it, because this is going to challenge some norms that you're used to in really good ways, but also might force us to think a little creatively at times. Also, we ask that we maintain confidentiality in these meetings and these sessions so that everyone can be a lead learner. Sometimes when we're learning new things or thinking through new processes, we ask really odd questions or maybe get misunderstandings. So we hope that everybody can give grace, but expect excellence as we go through the work together. Any questions you have so far, please drop them in the chat, and then we will make space for more questions throughout the session. So I just wanted to let you know, I'll try and check the chat during our breaks. But if it's easier, we're a bit of a smaller group and you just want to unmute and interrupt me, that is no problem. If something's burning and I'm just moving along, please interrupt, because when I've got the screen going, I can't always see everybody. So wanted to let everyone know that. And finally, will all of these glorious slides be available after this session? Yes, I will be sending everything to you, including the notes that I'm looking from in the notes of the PowerPoint. So you have all this wonderful information to share with your colleagues and modify and contextualize to your context. And then I'm going to come off the screen again here. And as we go through today's, you will have a resource that I would like you to use while you're referring to and have available. So let me just put that in the chat. And it will have a link to all sorts of documents that we will be referring to that are available on our website. We just have located them in one easy Google document for everybody to quickly hyperlink into different documents. So open up that tab and have it available. We will go into some of the documents as we together this evening. Oops. Okay. So as you can see, we've got these linked for you. And I'll be referring to some of these different resources as we go through the slide presentation so that you know where to find this information and what it's related to and how it might help you as you move into building your models. So this section will be successful use of your time if please jot that your response to that question. I'd like to get a little bit of your input, your insights into what will make today's session successful for you. If I can't accomplish it in the session today, I will work to find the resources or coordinate anything needed to also help you be successful. But if you could just drop in the chat, or say out loud some of the things that will maybe help you be successful as we go through today's session. And it can be as simple as getting the slides. And you're welcome to type your responses into the meeting chat. I have really good wait time, guys. Awesome. Thank you, Esther. Have a global overview for all school principals of new. Excellent. Good. That's great. If something comes up as I'm going along, please don't hesitate to add it in the chat. I want to learn more about the workforce and what it could bring for our school, overview of the model, and perhaps some examples of absolutely, you're going to go through all of that. Practical information, I'm with you there. Having ideas about the steps from identifying your why and the concrete plans, and like to learn even better how to communicate the model with others, learn how Saxion can engage, get a better understanding of the building blocks, and more knowledge in the process for implementation. Excellent. We are all on the same page then. Excellent. Thank you. Thank you. So we're going to start with that why of identifying your launching why and your team. So we talked about this a little bit with the group that came to the US in April. However, we did a deeper dive into the why. And some of that I think you're still working on, but as well, this is a why at your school level. So that's why I kind of want to make the difference between the two sessions we did together. I helped the team that come to Arizona kind of think about the bigger why for Saxion in the Netherlands to adopt this model. And then you also want to bring it down to the school level as well. So why this will, point and piece to start with at your school so that everybody has an understanding of why they're going to make such a large change in their practice. Oops. And to give you a sense of what educators in the US said, we did some work with educators over the last year and a half to kind of get a sense of what were some of their whys, what's coming up at the teams for them. So these are some of the things that came up for educators in the US about why they wanted to get involved in this model. Teacher satisfaction in the piloted grades. They were looking initially just to see, does this improve teacher satisfaction? Oops. Staff members are doing more meaningful work. Teachers who are part of this model feel more empowered as educators. Imagine that. The stress, it relieves the stress of being a lone teacher in front of a group of students, especially for our new teachers. growing a workforce out of people who have a future with our district and who are committed to a long-term career in education. That's a key one, because we know as our global societies are evolving, people are not entering jobs for a lifetime like they used to. They're switching jobs, and it's expected to have 2 or 3 jobs, maybe 4 over a lifespan. So this is a key piece for us, as well as how do we maintain that consistency at the schools. Teachers are remotivated to do what they love. That's awesome. That's exactly what we want to see. Teachers feel more success and less overwhelmed, invigorated and fulfilled staff, reduce uncovered days, as well as talents are utilized and teachers become experts in their areas of strength. Another really key component where teachers, after they've been in the field for a while, they get bored. It's in the literature that after 5 years to the mid-career, there's kind of a space in there where that's where we lose a lot of teachers in the US, as well as there's no advancement, there's no way to specialize, there's nothing different. So this has also reinvigorated some of those components of just really getting people back into the job. And then thinking about as well, again, looking at the learning cohort, how this can personalize learning. And so we know we've been able to increase student achievement in the piloted grades when we've done this. Each learner in our system is known by name, strength, interest, and need, and guided by those interests and needs. More student-led, project-based experiences. Our teams have found project-based learning to be such a different, beast, if you will, because it's not so challenging to work across classrooms or across the schedule. They have the time and space for it. They can plan for it. This is another way we're really looking at addressing equity issues for students, our English language learners, our students with special needs, our students coming from families that may have been displaced. Students experiencing differentiated instruction. Teachers are really able to revise how they deliver instruction and think about the needs of students, group the students in those groups, and then strategically deploy different pedagogical practices so that it is really targeted for that group of students. Increase individualized student to adult time. We thought maybe one of the things people think going into this model is students would have less opportunity with an adult, and we found it's been actually the opposite. More students have access to high quality teachers. Again, I don't know if it's like this where you are from, but I know from my own children's experience every year before in the summer, as we were going into the next grade, there was a mad dash of parents to call the school because they wanted teacher A, but not teacher B or C. And if their student got with teacher B or C, that was not the preferred teacher, the child was stuck all year. Of course, in the parent's mindset, the parent was unhappy. This way, students get access to every teacher at the grade level, and also when they get access to those teachers, they're getting access to their strengths. So that's something we found to be really, really powerful for our teachers. And so what you want to think about with your team and with your schools is, what is your why? And I'd like to give you a chance, and just, maybe from some of those examples I shared with you just here, or some that you have been thinking about on your own, could we share some of the whys that you're thinking about engaging in this work with teams at your school? Maybe thinking around either the deeper and personalized learning, or how you might think about improving staff quality, staff camaraderie, etc. So take a minute and just pop in the chat, especially principals. What is your why? What made you intrigued to do this? What do you think is going to be the why that you want to share with your team? Or what are you beginning to think might be your why? I'll give you a couple minutes to just pop that in the chat or type it in the chat, and just so we can get a sense of what different people are thinking about. Nice. More people in a group of children. So really thinking about the educators that can come around the children, the flexibility this could offer, the opportunity for the learners. Absolutely. Oh, that you're speaking to my heart. Teachers can be experts. That's amazing. And it's often forgotten as we get going into classes and schools. That's great. So these are really great whys to begin to think about. I know also we are thinking about the global why for your system as well. So a lifetime in front of the classroom. Yeah, absolutely. We want to keep people in the field. I know you don't have a teacher shortage like we do here, but we want to keep those high quality teachers in the classrooms, and we want to push them to continue to grow and develop and not stagnate in the profession because they don't have anywhere to go. Sharing of the education and care for the students, absolutely. When you think of teaching as a very dynamic job, when you are only focusing on one specialization, is it enough for teachers to enjoy happiness in their job? Great question. We are finding in our model, yes, because teachers are able to take a step as a leader in their areas of specialization. And then they're part of the team where they're not the lead specialist in that area. So they get a chance to work at both levels is what we're finding. These are all really interesting whys. And again, I encourage you to think about this with your teams when you're looking at the model really strategically at your school site with your leadership teams or leadership at your district. All right, so next we're going to go into goal setting. Once you have your sense of why, and that's been thought through with your team, we also want to talk about how to translate that into tangible goals, especially in this first year of the pilot implementation. We really suggest that in this implementation year, you think about setting goals for your implementation. This will help you track what's happening with the team. It'll also help you strategically also benchmark your support and find out, are we going in the direction we thought we needed to go in? There may be times where you need to kind of pull back and revise, but we do bring the model of the SMART goal to you. SMART goals are what we have shared with the schools, and they're meant to be aspirational yet achievable. And so this is something we really want you to think about with either your teams that are implementing or your leadership team about what are some of your goals around this pilot implementation. And those goals should be specific, measurable, meaning that's something you can tangibly see and measure the difference in. That will be important for sharing and communicating this model. Achievable, you want to make sure that the goals you're setting are within locus of your control. Also realistic, something that's feasible within the horizon of a year, and thinking about them as time bound. So regardless of the format of your goals, the purpose is that you should set goals for you want to be at the end of your pilot year, which are the next level down of your why, and will help you know at the end of the pilot what worked and what didn't, what is invaluable when we are changing something in the education. You'll have time to consider your why and your year-long goals with your teams, but I want to give you some examples of some goals that we have shared with teams that we have thought might be helpful for them. These are just an example. You may design goals around different components, but when we looked at goal setting with our schools, one of the things we looked at was we asked them to set 4 goals, actually, 4 SMART goals. We wanted them to think about one goal around students. We wanted them to think around the process of what they're doing, an educator goal, and a perception goal. So you can see when you look at these goals, they have different focus area, but they still are following that SMART goal acronym. So for example, in the student goal, one school is looking at increasing student retention between freshman and sophomore year, very specific, just the freshman and the sophomore at the school, by 20 students by enrollment 2024. So this is an example of they wanted to see, does this model help retain students at the high school level? Another example of a goal is the educator goal. They had a goal to increase educator retention, so less than 4 teachers leave due to satisfaction in summer of 2024. So this goal was also looking at what's going to be the goal for our teachers when we're doing this. What are we going to pay attention? The process goal looked at, the pilot itself. Launch 1 team in the academic year 23-24 and be prepared to launch 2 more teams by spring of 23-24. So this, again, is very specific. They're starting small. They're just going to start with 1, learn from there. But in this goal, the process, they're already going to be thinking about the next 2 teams that are going to come on very shortly. So you can see how they're already starting to set up the scale as well as the spread. And also they looked at perception. This is also incredibly key. And this example comes from like tying the perception to families. You could tie the perception to teachers. You could tie the perception to students, to the community. But this one is an example of families who have a student on a team report 10% higher satisfaction with communication from and with school educators. So again, they wanted the perception goal with families to really tie around the communication that's coming home from the school. Those were some of the things they wanted to think about. So these are just examples of goals we suggested with schools. These are not goals you have to replicate, but the point is we do encourage you in your pilot year to set 4 SMART goals around 4 key benchmarks that will allow you to kind of monitor and think about the different stakeholders in the implementation of your Organisación. I know I'm butchering that, I'm sorry. With that, so once you have a clear why and your clear pilot goals, the first step of implementation is then to identify who's going to be on this first team. What are you going to pay attention? How are you going to choose? And we ask you think about this really strategically. And from my years in schools, I know often maybe more advanced teachers are often chosen to pilot something or lead something, but we want you to think a little bit more broadly when you're thinking about that pilot team in this model. There are 2 kind of main heavy factors that we took into consideration when we were starting with our why, our goals, and our schools looked at the 2 main components was where was their educator readiness to do this kind of coming in, and where were the student needs, and where was this going to come together? And so our schools kind of balanced back and forth between thinking about, what adults, what teachers on staff would really be ready, who are ready to implement something new, maybe have an innovator's mindset. They're risk takers, they're positive, they have confidence. How to teach, how does that group of teachers get along? And then also thinking about maybe what grade level, where is a grade level where we need to strategically think about this? Some schools started at the primary levels and thought about working up within the school. Others just picked a grade level where they felt, there was a need to really think about at that community of students. So this is really contextual for you to think about. And so factors to consider when you're thinking about where to start, when you've got your why and you're thinking about your goals. So when you're thinking about educator readiness, some things I just shared, who's eager, who might be eager and willing? You need to think about strengths, working styles, experience levels. I think you also need to add in your job sharing component. Where is this going to layer in? Where there might be more flexibility with some of the job sharing. Is there potential to move a teacher from a grade level down? Maybe there's a really strong teacher at at the 5th grade level, but you have other teachers at the 3rd grade level, but you'd like to bring that person down. Could you do that? Would that work? Or do you need to think about new hires? And then on the student side, we looked at also within our piloting teams and the grade levels, what were this particular student needs, including, we use the word the acronym IEP, Individual Education Plan, which is for students with special needs, or your English language learners, which are these are kind of our 2 biggest buckets of students we need to consider. And then the particular student impact. So these are things we had to think about kind of simultaneously and toggle back and forth between what was more important. And what I'd like to give you a sense of is I'm going to share a video of two of our educators. We're going to hear from Marcy Lang and Richard Long from Mountain View High School. We're going to hear from a woman named Krista Adams, who is a principal from an elementary school, and Lisa Cannon, another elementary principal. And we're going to give you a sense of what they thought about as they were principals identifying their pilot team, what teachers, what students, what factors they took into consideration. And I think it's really helpful to hear from the field what people were going through and how they managed this in their school buildings. So I'm with that going to start the video and give you a sense. And we'll start with Marcy Lang and Richard Long from Mountain View High School. I'm going to start the video. I think the audio will come through, but if it doesn't, could someone just let me know so I don't play the video in silence?
The first thing we thought about was the who. The who as far as what students we wanted to include, and then the who as far as the teachers. So first, when we were thinking teaming, we were thinking freshmen. Of all the high school grade levels, the freshmen need the most support, and they're the ones who need those adults wrapped around their needs, getting to know them through the teaming model. So we thought definitely we want freshmen involved, and then which teachers teach freshmen. And of all of those teachers, we wanted to go with the believers first. Which teachers bought into this teaming model? Which teachers were excited about it?
I specifically chose a team that was already functioning pretty well together in a typical PLC professional learning community model where they had their own kids in the classrooms during the day, but after school they were doing a lot of planning together, collaborating together. I knew they liked each other. They had started sharing students for intervention, that sort of thing. They had a lead on that team that I knew was capable of working with various type of personalities, and she had been successful and was just really positive when it came to working with other people. So I just knew that that was a team that I could trust, and that if this was going to work, they would be the ones to help me figure it out.
Teacher disposition, that was the number one factor as we went through starting this. And then what we wanted to, with the teaming, we wanted to make sure that we had a male and a female on every single team, if at all possible, teacher. And we wanted to have, we wanted to try different subject areas in each of the teams as we were kind of prototyping this. And so we tried 3 different subject areas for the 3 teams that we started. And so as we looked at the different subject areas, we tried to also look at personality and disposition, because we didn't want to put like 2 really aggressive personalities on the same team, not only because it would be overwhelming for the 3rd team member, but then it would also potentially be overwhelming for the students.
My initial team I selected because I had a teacher, one of my strongest teachers who had already shown a lot of strength in coaching. She had residents and student teachers, so she just had a lot of capacity. And then as a team as a whole, so that I knew I had a strong lead on that team. And then the other 2 professional educators that were also on that team also were very strong. They had very different strengths, and we had designed for them to be together as a team very intentionally. They also were the team of individuals who had initially when we rolled out project-based learning at our school, those were the ones whose hands went up right away. So I knew they had an innovator mindset. They were really wanting to take risks and willing to take risks without worrying too much about, failing. They were okay with the idea of failure as a part of their learning. Data or in terms of achievement had continuously shown that their students were learning and growing and They just seemed to have what was needed for us to start something so new and so unknown.
So some really, really powerful examples of how some of our principals really thought about. Okay, really who they chose. I think they thought about those personalities. I thought it was really interesting how the team from the high school really thought about aggressive personalities and didn't want to overwhelm the other team member as well as the students. So these are all things to consider when you're putting a team together. I can share, not every is the perfect opportunity, but things they took time to think about when they began the model. And as you're thinking about which educators and what students and grade levels, there are also team-based roles you need to consider as well. So in our model, we have defined the Next Education workforce team as at least at the minimum of 2 teachers on a team. So it's at least 2 professional educators who are part of what we call the core team. They are the lead teachers together. It may be 3, 4, or 5, but that's the core. We haven't had any teams get any bigger at the core level, I think, than 5 teachers. There are extended members of teams, which will make a team look like it's 12 people, but what the core is at least 2 professionals. And that question just came up in the chat. So one of the roles you want to think about is that lead teacher role. And hold on, I got myself mixed up here. And that lead teacher role is probably someone with a little bit more experience, maybe also has the opportunity to kind of step back from teaching in at least 50% of their duty. So they directly interact with students at least 50% of the time in our model, but they also take on leadership roles that keep them, help them step away at times. They may be overseeing all the data that's being collected around students as they're thinking about the model and looking at student acceleration and progress. This person needs to lead the team in maintaining high expectations for student leaders. So you really want to think about, someone that's a natural leader, that's well respected, that can guide the team all support, instructional planning, as well as someone who's really good at co-planning, co-teaching, can model for teachers, can coach them, and give feedback. And this is, I want to kind of put a caveat here that not all excellent teachers make excellent lead teachers. So again, I caution you to go back to that personality of who might be a lead teacher, because the ability to think in a co-plan, co-teach model is someone that's going to walk alongside their colleagues. And you want to have that nurturing, supportive structure from that lead teacher so that it doesn't turn into maybe like a little kingdom. So another component you want to think about teacher, and that's important for them, is for that they can create and sustain the momentum for the work and the development of the team. There's someone that can come up to that big picture, 20,000 foot view of things and see where the positive is happening, and also challenges that kind of but also step back and look at the big picture. It's someone that, and maybe they're a local leader for the work. Otherwise, this often defaults, if we're not careful, that can default to you being the leader of the team as the principal. And that's not going to be helpful for your role in the school or your support of the team. So that lead teacher, especially in your pilot, is also something to think about. And maybe that's a focus for one of your goals, is that the lead teacher is supported properly. So these are just ideas to think about, but to consider as you're thinking about the roles on the team. And then finally, there are other members of the team that are extended at teammates, we'd say. So the core team is really those core teachers, but then there might be others in your that also part of a team in an extended format. It might be another additional professional educators you have at the school, maybe parents that are, allowed to come into the school and work. In the US, we have what we call paraprofessionals, who are educators that don't have a full teaching certificate, but do have some training to work in specialized areas. You may have special education or language teachers to consider. If you've got student teachers from Saxion or other universities coming in, we are leveraging here our teacher candidates as also extended members of the team. And then in our model, we're also beginning to think about how do we bring in people from the community also to be part of this extended team role. Maybe it's someone that comes in just once or twice a year and they're coming in from the business world to kind of share a unique content area that only could really get from that business expert in the community that's coming in to share their resources, and they're just temporary. So the team doesn't have to be a set team all the time. And then the extended team tends to be more flexible and comes in and out of the model as needed and appropriate. Are there any questions so far? All right, I'm gonna go next, and I'm actually I pulled a video of a colleague of mine, Lisa Wyatt, and she is going to walk through, I believe this is Lisa Wyatt. No, this is not Lisa yet, sorry. We're going to hear from some of our schools right now about how they, hold on, let me see this up better. Oh, so as we were looking at, who's on your team, who is, how did you go through all this, and how did you match the why to inform how to launch the team models? We're going to hear from some of our school leaders again, and then I'm also going to bring in another colleague who I videoed in one of the sessions who did a really nice job of explaining some of the models in the different schools. So let's listen to some of our school leaders first.
My why is that kids need to find more meaning and relevance in their schoolwork. And so when I'm thinking about teachers who connect with kids, relationships are the foundation of learning and also of purpose. When kids are or a class based on a relationship they have with that teacher that keeps them coming back. So we pick teachers who are good people, teachers who seek to focus on strengths of students and build relationships with every student. I think that was the beginning for us.
And then my why would be related to, I reckon it's similar, but a belonging place. So freshmen, we really wanted to move the needle in a huge way with our freshman class. We know that here at Mountain View, we'll lose about 100 to 120 freshmen will drop out between their freshman and sophomore year. And so we want our graduation rate, that impacts dropout rate. Also, if we can help their freshman year, then we've now potentially impacted so many more things down the road. And so starting with freshmen was a big part of our why, and helping them
Our why was really, we were trying to go out after instructional shifts. We knew we wanted the deeper personalized learning part, and we knew that our model was very limited. Right now, we were teaching isolated skills and in a more segmented fashion. So the why was we needed to get to a more deeper personalized learning for our students. And it did contribute because I knew that I already had teachers who had the skills instructionally with the students in the classroom to start taking on these bigger how we approach instruction.
Project-based learning, they were already doing some elements of teaming in planning as well as in the execution of lessons. So we were already seeing some of those things. And again, just thinking about where we want to go, and how this team was really, they were really primed for it. And then I think another really important point of this is 2 of the teachers were mid-year teachers. So for me, it was really important that we created a space in the school where as we were building capacity, as they continue to build their own capacity, how are we and her teammate, although was an amazing teacher, she was still new in her career and was new to the school. And so it was just an opportunity to really pair people together and allow them to continue in their strengths, but also continue to develop their professional skills.
The why, I think, is wrapped up in, I think, 2 parts. One was understanding the value that we believed it would add for our students, because the traditional model of school did not work for them. The second, I think, factor to it is having teachers that were willing to step out of their comfort zone, their why as well, which is helping those at-risk kids.
So again, I can't emphasize enough, how the principals really thought about, who's going to launch this model with them. And you can see, even as they've begun to do the work, they thought about it in multiple strategic ways, whether it was the relationship between the teacher and the student, but also the relationship between the teachers and the teachers. If you remember what Lisa said, she was thinking about new teachers and lesser experienced teachers and how they could benefit from being on a team. In the US, we require our new teachers to often go through an induction training, what we call, in their first or second year within the teaching field, once they are, graduated and in the profession. Often those induction programs are minimal. They are extra work for a new teacher, and they take them away from the focus of what the rest of the school is doing, or cause them extra work when they're already stressed out. So the teaming model is another way to bring in these newer educators who are still learning, even though they've got all the certifications, and especially in years when they're putting everything this away, some of that angst, which I thought was really powerful. And so to look at some examples of team-based models, this is where I had Lisa come in. So I recorded Lisa in one of our earlier sessions, and I wanted you to hear from her. She is one of our senior directors that is implementing the model in Arizona, and she was one of the initial members of the Next Education Workforce team. And so she's going to share some of the team-based models at different schools. And I wanted to have her explanation because she knows some of the fine details I often don't. And I thought it'd be really powerful for you to hear from her. So let's hear from Lisa sharing some of the examples of these team-based models.
So what we're going to do is look at 2 different examples. I see several people like bending down and jotting notes from leaders, and I'm so thankful to have their voices to share. The 2 examples that we're going to hone in on. The first one is Stevenson Elementary, and I'll give you a little quick primer about Stevenson Elementary. So Krista Adams, who just talked about going after instructional shifts, that's one of the initial pilot teams that we're going to talk about. The second one is Westwood High School, and they came at it a slightly different way. We'll talk about that too. As we dive in on looking at these examples, there are 2 things that are really the focus of the who, which is that we're thinking about both who are the students that we want to wrap around, and then who are the educators that we're going to wrap around those students, right? And so Andrea showed a slide earlier that's got kind of these like 2 sets of arrows, and you could think of it as kind of this like circular that these 2 things feed into each other. So I think you'll hear some of that. So for Stevenson, for those who are not familiar, it's in the Mesa Public Schools. It is a Title I school. They have pre-K through 6th. They have about 700 students. And again, this was Principal Krista Adams talking about the ways that they wanted to make a shift. She called it going after instructional change, going after instructional shifts, moving to more deeper and personalized interdisciplinary approaches. So in the pilot year, this is what the team looked like at Stevenson. One of the things that you did not hear in that video, but that was really key for Krista, talked earlier about educators need to think about differently together, right? That Laura Bristol, who would be able to lead this change, that they were already working together well and collaborating well. What you didn't hear Krista describe is that you'll see here it says 85 third graders. Part of why they identified third grade is that as second graders, those 85 students had 4 different teachers. They had not in a teamed approach, just like teacher after teacher leaving because of personal stuff, because of challenges. That second grade group had a really disrupted year. And so they saw high need for those third graders. You'll see that in the pilot year, there are 3 certified educators, one of whom is a lead teacher. And then they did also have teacher candidates from Mary Lou Fulton Teachers College. You'll note that their pilot year is 2021. We all know what was happening in the world during that school year. This team, to hear them talk about the ways in which they not just survived, but actually thrived and were able to support their students is really remarkable. Now, what I want you to see is the ways in which the composition of the team changed. So as we look to now, this core educator team, things look pretty different. A couple of years later at Stevenson, they're school-wide. They have multi-age bands. There are now 4 certified educators who are members of the core team. They may or may not have teacher candidates from ASU. There are extended team members that are showing on the right side of my screen. And what Krista would tell you is that they could not have started here. Because if I go back one, these educators needed to first figure out some things about how we work in this team-based model. And as we add more educators, it's more complicated, right? There are some affordances of having more people, but you've got to have a layer of like, how do we do this together first as a core team before adding a whole bunch? So I share this because I think as you look to your vision of where you want to get to, sometimes we've got to chunk it out, right? So think about what is that first team going to look like? Our other example, Westwood High School, big comprehensive high school, grades 9-12. This is again in Mesa Public Schools. And their pilot focus was 9th grade because of their students coming in 9th grade. They knew that their graduation rate was not where they wanted it to be. And a lot of that shows up in 9th grade. So in their pilot teams in 2018-19, English, math, and science, those 3 educators wrapped around like 75 to 85 9th graders. And again, there's some big changes to look at what those teams look like now. There are now on a couple of those teams, a certified special education teacher embedded as core members of the team. Other teams have a certified ELL educator who supports ELL learners. Decide for your context, what do your students need, and know that it's going to change over time and that that's okay. There's no one model. This is one of the things we say all the time that is like sometimes frustrating to people. It depends on your context. So think about your learners, think about the educators who are ready, and let those 2 inputs feed into as you're identifying your pilot team or pilot teams. All right, with that, I'm going to stop my share.
I realized I was on mute. Sorry. I wanted you to get a chance to hear from Lisa some of those things that the different schools, really considered as they were building their model. And what she said at the end, there is no one model, is exactly true. There are variations kind of tied to these core themes, but it's looking different at each school. And that's what it has to, it's contextual to the community. So what I'd like to give you time to do now is, I know that we have some of our principals here and we have others here to also kind of be help thinking about this model, but I'd like you to go back to that resource page I gave you. And in that first section of resources is the strategic plan application. And I'd like you to pull that up. and I'm going to put you in breakout rooms randomly. And I'm just going to let you begin to talk through some of the things that are coming up for you in some of these first key areas. Maybe why the next education workforce model, your side, year-long goals for the pilot. You won't have your goals yet, but maybe you can begin to share some ideas of things you're thinking about. And I'm hoping that having a cross dialogue with others will also help you think about other things in your context that I may not be aware of. Who might be on that first core educator team? What might you be thinking about lead teachers in your context? As well as, hold on, I've got one more thing down here. Gotta cheat. As well as who might be on the extended educator team. So I'm gonna stop sharing because it's hard for me to manage everything like that. But I'm gonna give you time to get into breakout rooms and just have maybe a 10-minute conversation around some of these key pieces. If you are not a principal, but you are part of the support group, that's the system level group that's thinking about this, I ask that you also join in the conversation because it will give you a chance to learn about some of the things that principals are thinking at the school level that might impact other system level components that we need to think about as we continue to grow. Does that make sense? So you'll take a little bit of time and begin to think about those first components of the strategic plan application. I'll put that slide back up, but I'm going to give you 10 minutes. So we'll come back at 35 after the hour to work with some others and kind of begin to, all I'm asking is that you jot down some notes, have some small discussion around some of the contextual components you want to note around this first section that we just went through. Because I think as you get to work with your teachers and your school teams, things might shift a bit, but it would be good to get ideas from each other. Okay? All right. So let me go to breakout rooms. Yes, absolutely. I will put the link again in the chat. Here is the link to the resource documents. And then let me get breakout rooms going. Let's see, we've got about 19 people there. So I'm going to put us in about 4 breakout rooms. So there's about 4 to 5 people per room. And I will include the co-host to go in the room, Patrick. All right, here we go. I will call you back at probably in about 10 minutes. I'll watch the clock, but give you just enough time to begin to discuss, take some notes, maybe add down some ideas of other things you're thinking about or coming up, even if they're challenges that you think, oh, this may not work here, I'm not sure. Let's write them down and begin to discuss. Our motto here at ASU is, we never say no, we just think, well, let's figure it out. So sometimes things that don't seem possible yet, they're easily figured out, but they just may take a little more time. So with that, I'll put you into groups to kind of begin discussing. Looks like we're all back. Great. So hopefully you had a chance. I know that was a lot of speaking on my part, but you had a chance to kind of do a little bit of a brain dump around the why and the goal setting and thinking about your teams. And we're able to share some information briefly with each other. I think it's just helpful to kind of jot some notes down or have that discussion as we move into the next sessions of our work together. So we're gonna, and I'm realizing from that the videos are not always starting clearly right away. And I apologize. I have had a couple times my Zoom tell me my Wi-Fi is a little unstable, but it should be back on. Oh, is everyone there? Is everyone there? There we are. Okay, sorry, my Wi-Fi had jumped to the other Wi-Fi in the house, so that's why it went unstable. So I think we're okay now. I did want to quickly, before we get into the deeper and personalized learning, just have someone come say hi really quick. And this is my husband. You can see he's walking. He's doing much better. So he just wanted to say a quick hello and thank you.
Yep, thank you for the flowers. That was very kind of you. Appreciate it. And yeah, like she said, I'm doing good. Just got home from my PT, so.
All right, thanks, son. All right, I wanted to prove he's doing better. So all good there, and let's get back on track with the deeper and personalized learning. Hopefully the Wi-Fi will be better now. So we're going to move into this next section, and then after we'll move quickly through this, and then we'll take a short break, I promise. So we're going to get into creating a vision for deeper and personalized learning. And I want to begin going back to some of our school sites. And we're going to hear from Marcy and Richard about why it's important to consider deeper and personalized learning as part of this work.
Next Education Workforce is a structure. It's a teaming model. The other thing that needs to shift along with just kind of how kids are grouped with teachers is, what does instruction look like? How do you get that deeper and personalized learning for every student? And that has been, I think, such a challenge to shift our instructional approach at the same time as shifting, the structure in which it takes place, like the framework. So that to me that's a huge challenge, but one I think is essential.
There's got to be a parallel shift of instructional design and instructional practices and strategies. And if there's not a parallel shift, then you can put the design into place, and you can make it all come together, and you have this great structure there. But then what happens with the students when they're in the classroom? If that doesn't actually shift, then I think you're just finding a new way to group students. That's really all it is. And so that parallel shift has got to happen. And that is where the rubber meets the road, in my opinion. That's the real crux of this entire situation, is being able to do both at the same time.
Next Education Workforce is a
There you go. Hopefully that video was better. Did it come on clearer? Okay. So the big piece that we're thinking about is deeper and personalized learning, we are sure is probably going on at many of your schools, but this is also a newer way to think about it, because at the core of our teams is the commitment to team-enabled deeper and personalized learning. So it's not the teachers, one-to-one, it's the team thinking through this together. And that's what we're going to go through today. So when we think about deeper learning, and this, there is more information, and it was in that resource page, and I'm not going to have you pull it out and read it, but there is a document on deeper and personalized learning that you can go through. But one of the key pieces I really want you to think about is the common language around deeper learning, so that we can really begin to ground our teams in that perspective. And thinking about, how are we building skills required for success in life? Where are those 21st century skills, those success skills, and those transferable skills also be included within the curriculum? And so some of the shifts you're going to see from traditional to deeper learning. So if you look in the center in this chart here, these are common points that we look at in teacher delivery, as within classrooms, within what we call walkthroughs or teacher evaluations. But in traditional learning, instructional practices tend to be more teacher-centered and direct instruction, because there's just one adult in the classroom, and that's sometimes all a teacher can manage given the context of the curriculum or the content. They may not be as familiar with all of it, or they may not have just the manpower to deliver it in the most strategic way. So when we're looking at deeper learning in the teams, they're shifting into more project-based and inquiry-based instructional practices. This is something that in the United States, we have been kind of chasing these gold standards within education and trying to implement them, but it's often been very difficult in the model of education we've had. And we're finding the teaming model is really allowing for some of these shifts in instructional practices to occur in really strategic ways. When we think about student outcomes in traditional learning, it's typically narrow, focusing on easily measured academic content. So in the United States, especially at our elementary grade levels, we do in my opinion, an overabundance of assessment, but really just focused in on the academic content. But when we get into the deeper learning that's team enabled, we are not only focusing on academic, but we're also able to focus on those intrapersonal and interpersonal student outcomes that we also need to develop within students, those soft skills, the ability to work with each other, to think differently, to look beyond their own context. So that all gets layered in at a much deeper level. With instructional delivery, we have noticed, at least in the United States, it becomes heavy on teacher-centered whole group delivery. Again, that's probably easiest to manage for teachers. Getting students into small groups when you're the only adult in the room can be challenging. As a former teacher, I did a lot of small group work, but I spent so much time training my students how to operate independently without me. I couldn't monitor them across the room. So this is really shifting some of those practices in the teams where students are in self-directed learning paths at times and they're pacing themselves, and the educators are actually to step back as the guides in some components of their learning. And then the other shift we saw was in questioning. Really, teachers in traditional learning, often in evaluations, questioning is an element across many teacher rubrics here in the United States around teacher, performance. And we tend to see a lot of low-level questions throughout the day as part of teachers' normal practices, when questioning is really beginning to get deeper through the teams, because we are letting the lead teacher take the lead in some of the content areas. People are stepping forward with more content knowledge so they can really push for some of those deeper and higher level questions that create application and transfer of the learning. So these are some of the shifts we are beginning to see in the team enabled deeper learning and personalized learning. And again, a lot of this information is in your resource. We're just providing an overview for you. So again, here's some quick examples of traditional learning. You can see on the left hand, sometimes teachers like myself use small groups. Students peer assess each other's writing, maybe based on the scoring criteria the teacher has provided. Maybe they've provided, something for the students to kind of self-monitor. But in the deeper learning, we're able to get to in our team models. Yes. Mm-hmm. Oh, is there a question? Oh, okay. Students are actually co-creating some of the assessments for their writing. They're able to then assess themselves based on the criteria they set goals with. So we can see, a shift in the pedagogies. We can see a shift in getting to the content at a deeper level through the team-based model. And so here is just another example. Because it's your evening and I don't want to take too much of your time, I'm going to leave this example in there and just move forward. But these are other examples you can share with your teams to kind of provide them more contextual information on the shifts from traditional to deeper learning. So the actions teams have taken to create the deeper learning, and what's true throughout all of these examples, is that teams are better positioned in the teams to create the deeper learning through some critical actions. As a result of having more educators to support a roster of students, teams can better create rigorous content that is equitable and complex and can spend the majority of their time on higher order thinking. Similarly, they can use their expertise to increase the relevant and authentic application of this content and create more opportunities for inquiry and creative thinking, critical thinking. So you can see from the slide here where they're really looking at taking the content that's provided to them and going into more rigorous application and relevant application for students. And these are shifts that we hadn't seen teachers really been able to make at scale in a one teacher, one classroom model. We may have had pockets of, bright stars of teachers here or there, but in the teaming model, then you also have to remember that these lead teachers and teachers are modeling for each other within the model. So all of that professional learning is embedded together. So if we shift towards looking at personalized learning, and again, there's the resource in your resource guide, there is the same kind of focus on tailoring the lessons for each student's strength. And you can see when you get into the description, the elements brief, that it's about voice and choice and flexibility. And these are things our youth are really starting to think about. They have access to technology in ways none of us did as youth. They have access to information, and they know often what they want to learn about, what they're interested in, and just the context of how information is being delivered to them in today's society is so different that the ability to personalize learning is critically important in schools. So many of our apps and online programs are really able to personalize things. It's become a way that we're thinking, and students are expecting to see this in their education. And it's often been very difficult for us really to truly achieve in the traditional models we've been mostly following. So again, in looking at some of those shifts from traditional learning to personalized learning, we kind of can look through the instruction again, student progress. We can think about focusing on assessment, and then the learning space configuration. So then this begins to add in a few more pieces of the puzzle. So in traditional learning and in the team-based, deeper and personalized learning model, we're teaching the same content, but the learning in the personalized, where we're personalizing it, is based on student strengths and needs, and it's more fluid. We're looking at what students already have in place and not asking them to repeat things they already know, and helping them accelerate to next steps. When we look at student progress in a traditional model, it often really comes down to how much seat time students have on the topic area. We in the US, for example, it's typically 50 minutes of English, 50 minutes of math, 50 minutes of science, 50 minutes of history. And that's, the progression is allowed in just that 50 minutes each day. When we're moving to the personalized learning and the team-based models, we're able to really progress students based on evidence of mastery, as opposed to just the time that we teach that subject, because they have undone the schedule in a way that allows them that flexibility. Again, the assessment focus is tying more to those formative assessments that we know can really inform instruction. It's really making student data become much more real to teachers and much more applicable to how they're using their teaching practices. And then the other thing to consider is the learning space configuration, and we'll talk about that a little bit later this evening. But when you're one teacher in one classroom, the inflexible, difficult to reconfigure for different learning tasks. I'd have to reset up my room for different centers, and I couldn't run my language arts centers at, right after my math centers, because I had to switch things out. In this new model, as we're able to use more rooms for different, identify rooms for perhaps different tasks or learning spaces, it provides so much more flexibility in the space and the setup and the time teachers need to kind of think about that learning environment. So we have a couple of examples again here. I'm not going to read through them, but they are for you to use with your teachers. These are great examples of how we're seeing teachers get into that more personalized learning through the team models. And another example. And then again, similar to deeper learning, what's true throughout all of these examples is that the teams are better positioned to create personalized learning through some critical actions. As a result of having more educators to support a roster of students and distributed expertise, teams can better personalize the learning through learning knowledge and through tailored learning experiences, as well as increase learner voice and choice and offer multiple learning paths. I do want to caveat all this that I'm saying, when our pilot teams and what we were just looking at with Lisa, when they implemented the model that pilot year, this wasn't all figured out then. This is part of what they started to learn in those smaller teams. And you could see how after year 1 and year 2, how the teams shifted and they began to touch into more of these components at a deeper level. So I also want to, let you know that these grew with the teams, and these are components that we learned as they were beginning to get into the model and really think through how they were working together. So bring these up as examples for you. And then also to think about the staffing that's needed to help the team of educators around these student groupings. We've been able to really rethink how to group students, whether it's based on social emotional issues, content and academic levels, whether it's for personal issues, language development, students with special needs. But as the team started to think about how they could diversify and deepen the learning and personalize, then they began to look at those dynamic student groupings. But this was also really tailored to how data rich we are in our US classrooms. I'm not as familiar with the data that's collected in your classrooms, but that might be an area that needs to be considered or introduced to teachers about what kind of student data they need to begin looking at. Because if they're going to group the students under one large roster and then group them in mini groups, they need to be able to dynamically change the groups as students are progressing. So that's a real benefit of the model, but also something to think about. I mean, you can see here on this slide, that the dynamic student groupings are responsive to student data. They're temporary. We do not group students permanently for the whole year. The groups change all the time, weekly. So that's how in-depth teachers are able to get as they're working together and assessing how students are progressing in their different learning activities, but then also thinking about those external, those extended team members that might need to come in and help support some of this. So that's also where you need to think about the balance of educator experience and expertise, and making sure that you're giving that, especially that pilot team, that extra support in that first year. And it may become part of the team model in the next year, but some of these things we don't know until we just get into them. And that's part of being a lead learner. So all of this leads to transferable skills, which are the skills students need for life outside the classroom and for the jobs that they will have, some of which we don't even know what they are, as technology and our societies are moving so fast, whatever new pandemics are coming. So teams are helping us create these deeper learning experiences more frequently and more equitably for students. Again, it's not just relying on those bright spot teachers that we know are out there, but it's also, this model is also helping us build the capacity of all of our educators, the novice, the maybe mediocre teachers that we still want to have in the classroom because they love it. They're great with children, but we know they can improve. This is a way for them to get that scaffolded support. So let's just quickly hear from some of our leaders about what deeper and personalized learning looks like now as a result of the teams they've built.
Our teachers often talk about before we were teaming, they were often doing like an I do, we do, a check for understanding, a pulling small group, trying to balance multiple interventions within, a time period within their own classroom. They often felt like they were spending the majority of their time with the same struggling learners, not really getting to know the needs of those kids who might need to be more enriched, or just like we're in the average grade level, space. And so what happens with the teaming, in order to provide that like deeper personalized learning, you have more adults to share the needs of the learners, so you can move the students according to their needs much more fluidly.
With good instruction by yourself, can you personalize learning? In some regards, I think so. The deeper learning, though, I think is the caveat here, that when teachers are working together, it's easier to make connections with content. It's easier to make connections as to what you're doing and why. The teachers are able to work with each other to co-design, and in several cases at Riverview, co-teach these learning experiences. But the fluidity that kids can move in and out of groups to accomplish learning tasks or their learning goals for the week would not have been possible if we were not teaming.
We have our science, ELA, social studies, and math they are all right next to each other. So if I am really killing it in ELA, but math is a struggle like it is for so many students, I can sit behind and I can sit through another rotation of math. There's a lot of flexibility that I give those teams to serve students. Our district's promise is that we serve students by strength and need. We get them ready for college, career, and community. So really knowing their individual need and what that student needs is one thing, but having the space and the time for a team to make that happen is the secret sauce.
So when you would walk into classrooms prior to teaming, you would still walk into class, you would see students engaged and students were working collaboratively with each other. What we saw as a result of teaming was when we walked into those spaces, not only did we see the students learning, continuing to learn in those small groups and really focusing on what their goals were, but we saw adults working with students in different ways. And so we could walk into that pilot group of 5th grade. When we walked into a space, I could see multiple types of learning happening, but I could see the intentionality of it. So it wasn't just kids were in small groups, but if I walked over, I could see specifically why those students were in small group, and I could see why the adult was with those students. On the other hand, I could see students working individually at the same time in the same space, and I could walk over to them and ask them specifically, what are you working on right now? And what are those students over there doing? And they were very clear. Students were very clear about not only their own learning, but where they may have been in a process. So if another group was in small group, they might say, those students are working on blank. I'm working on this. I had small group yesterday, or because I'm working on something different, I'm not going to have a small group until I need it. So it was really the articulation from students about describing the learning environment, whereas before the students weren't really aware of why they were just in a small group because I'm in this group, and they weren't really aware and didn't have that ownership of what that learning looked like and why it was being articulated that way for them.
It also looks like we're being more intentional about how we design instruction, that we are coming together as a team to create a unit where there is interdisciplinary connections, where there are connections to learning outside these school walls. And when you have a team doing this, the creativity increases, the ability to access resources, to just have a better designed learning experience.
So you can see some of the principals really notice some differences, especially when they question students on what they were learning. I really appreciated what Lisa said about that metacognition, that children are even getting around their own learning and beginning to understand, oh, this is why I'm in a small group. And some of those even social dynamics, are beginning to be unpacked, because it's all about where you are in your learning progression, not about who's in the group 1, group 2, group 3, and it's mixing up. You have in your strategic plan some notes for you to take down about perhaps what is the vision, the overall vision for the district, the overall vision for your school. What is your plan for enabling deeper learning through teams? What is your plan for enabling personalized learning through teams? And based on your plans for deeper and personalized learning, what are the implications for the existing curriculum? And thinking about then, also what resources will be needed to be successful in achieving this vision. And then we use this term tight and loose. So thinking about what is tight, what is non-negotiable, and what is loose, what is flexible. That might be some new concepts for your teachers and for your teams to think about. There may be some components of your teaming model where it's non-negotiable. The teachers must, operate in this way, but there's going to be a lot of flexibility also embedded in what they're able to do. So you have to kind of balance that for the teams and give them that autonomy. We have been sitting together for quite a while, and I know it's later for you all. So I'm going to give us some time. If you want to stop and ask some questions, I'm going to stay around in the room, but I'd also like to give you about a 15-minute biology break just to get up, maybe get a snack, get a cup of tea or something to drink. And we'll come back maybe at 10 after the hour and get through the next sessions. And we'll wrap up here very shortly, because as you're seeing, this is all going to begin to come together. But we're going to look at scheduling, environment, communication, and blanking on the last piece. But we have a few more pieces to get through to give you that whole picture. So why don't we take about a 15-minute break, come back at 10 after the hour. If you want to stick around and ask a few questions, I'll be here, or take your time, whichever you need. So we'll come back at 10 after the hour. We specifically want to look at team schedules at a school level element. So that's important for the master scheduling. It's critical also that as part of the schedule, your teams share students at the same time, and that there is both daily planning time for the core team and weekly planning for the extended team. So this may take some creative thinking if teachers don't have set planning time within the school day. That is something that we had to look at here. How could we manage this? How could we give teachers this extra time? And then we're going to hear from a few leaders again right now, just to see some of the things they realized as they were beginning to look at the master schedule, realizing, oh, what I thought as a principal was enough time for the team may not have been the right kind of time. Either it was too spread out, or it wasn't at the right time where it made sense for the teachers to collaborate, or extended team members weren't able to get the information. So really thinking about how that master schedule, at least for that pilot team, includes that the students are with the teachers at the same time, and that there's that daily planning is critical in how you kind of move forward with your model. So let's hear from Lisa. She actually has some really good insights.
The team of teachers really needs time to get together on a daily basis to get together. And so we planned for it as much as we could to make that happen. But then we didn't realize the impact, the ripple effect it would have on the rest of the master schedule. And so we had to really think that through very deeply. And continue to have to think that through very deeply. And that's something that I think it's a non-negotiable for the teaming model with our freshmen, is that they have to be able to have a common shared prep where they can come together and get with one another and talk about their students and talk about their units and talk about everything that they're doing, not just from content curriculum, but also from the students and what the students need.
So initially in that schedule, we already had time for.
Oops, sorry. I didn't mean to do that.
The team of teachers really needs time to get together on a daily basis to get together. And so
Let me fast forward a little bit.
Have to be able to have a common shared prep where they can come together and get with one another. And talk about their students and talk about their units and talk about everything that they're doing, not just from content curriculum, but also from the students and what the students need.
So initially in that schedule, we already had time for teacher collaboration. So that was already a gimme. But what I ended up having to do is create more time. What I envisioned as collaborative time for like student teachers collaborating, what they needed and what I gave was not necessarily the same. And so in looking at the schedule, it was 30 minutes sounded really good to me. Like, you're going to get 30 minutes of prep, additional planning time, 5 days a week. And what we ended up doing is they were saying, as much as the daily time is important, we need chunks of time, because we need to, what we're doing with students requires more, because they're doing more deeper learning. We need to be able to get deeper in our thinking, and we can't do it in 26 minutes. Like, there's just a time needed. And so in that master schedule, what I ended up having to do, which I wish I had known, is thinking about the adults on campus and strategically thinking about how I was going to use the other adults on campus to ensure that the teams had more planning time.
Yeah, so we prioritize that all of our freshman teams, those teachers all have an extra prep period. And that it's a hard sell because we don't get extra FTE from the district for this. It was something that we had to say, this is a priority, it's a non-negotiable. We're giving our teachers this time together. And it's in addition to their individual prep. So they have an individual prep period and they also have this team prep period. And there was a lot of murmuring from the teachers that are now teaching in isolation saying, hey, look at them, they get an extra prep period. And to that we said, okay, then be part of the teams.
We'd love to have you come join us.
We'd love to have
Are
you.
you saying you'd like to be on the teams next year? And that usually stifles that conversation.
Yeah, because it's hard work.
It's hard.
It's hard work. And to do it well, they need time to collaborate.
So you can see some really critical considerations and some of the principles. It's common here in the US through the professional learning communities we've engaged in to have, embedded teacher time, prep time, we call it, in the day. But what the schools found is they also needed additional time for those teams to plan. And that was non-negotiable. So that was one of those tight components. So things you really want to think about, and you can refer to some of the resources that I shared with you in that one-page resource guide, is first and foremost, keeping your vision at the forefront and get clear on your priorities. What is, tight, non-negotiable, and what is loose, what is flexible? Meaning, what are you prioritizing? The priorities should drive how time gets scheduled and should always be the first place you start. Second, we recommend that you consider students with special needs. We call it students with an individual education plan. That's the IEP, or second language students. It may be students that are displaced in your context. But think about how they will be placed on teams and how students can be grouped to ensure other educators who might support them can come in and still service them and then can also become part of that extended team. So again, you remember seeing that sometimes this took a full year of just piloting to get to that kind of more advanced level, because the teams really didn't know at the beginning what and when and how they were going to need those extra educators until they lived it. And that's where that support of the principal is really critical to kind of help navigate some of those components for the teachers. They're going to fail in places, and that has to be acceptable and okay, because they're learning how to implement this model in the context. So let's take a look at some sample master schedules. So the first one I want to show you is from a school called Kyrene Manitas Elementary. And I'm going to read some notes here. So for Manitas, the #1 priority for them was common planning time every day. So you can see in this schedule that the purple is represented for their common planning times. And I'm kind of moving my mouse around that. So that's how it wasn't at the same time every day, but they ensured that somehow every day in this school district, Monday, Tuesday, Thursday, Friday was the week, because Wednesdays is early release day where they do district training. So it's just kind of a model in the US. So that's why you don't see 5 days there. So the second priority for Manitas was shifting from 100% what we call pull out for special education, where students that had different needs were leaving the classroom to go to another classroom for those services. So they realized that model wasn't going to work for them anymore, and they needed to do what we call in the US a push-in model. So then they need to think about, how could they restructure the schedule so that that special educator that's working with the students could become part of that extended team. So they had to restructure the special education team to specialize in a content area, and then staggered all those blocks of times across the school days so that special education teachers could actually come into the classroom environment and work with those students they were assigned to work with. They created a rotating planning model for the special education teachers so that they can plan with the teams, supporting students and teachers in the content that all students are receiving. So then again, teachers are getting that extra training from that special educator who sometimes has some techniques that are good for all of our students. And as a third priority that is harder to see on the schedule, but that made a tremendous impact for them, was having instructional assistants tied to a team. So this school did have funds to have what we call paraprofessionals, instructional assistants that were not certified teachers, but people that have worked in education and have some certification skills, that they were also signed especially to a team. And that support stayed in place with the students throughout the day. They also moved with that special person also moved with the students to lunch and recesses in order to create a more seamless transition and consistency. And so then that began to have a positive impact on student behavior. So you can see this is just one elementary's approach. Now, another school, a middle school, this is Smith Junior High, but you've heard about Adam in this Adam Elementary in the videos, or Adam in the video. We have Adam's Elementary, and then Adam is one of the principals, about what he considered when building his master school schedule at Smith. So again, this doesn't look like much to us here, but Adam's priority was to build teams with 4 teachers: a language arts teacher, a math teacher, a social studies teacher, and a science teacher. Originally, he wanted each teacher to have one common planning time, but as he got into the scheduling and found out that they could possibly create two teacher preps if teachers opted to have 5 to 6 in each of their classes, then 100% opted to try. And when the school reevaluated halfway through the year, a time when they were kind of thinking about adjusting, every teacher opted to stay with the slightly larger class size and 2 preps. So they ended up making kind of slightly larger classes in some of the other classes to kind of work with this pilot team so they could implement this model. They also prioritized putting on one prep bumped up to a lunch period to really maximize time. So they gave the teachers the preparation time right before lunch so that they had a little bit more extended time. Although, I mean, they did go into some of their lunch time. So just another way Smith did it. And then a high school example, Westwood, and we learned a little bit about them earlier this evening, but this is what they looked at. They were implementing that 9th grade model where they wanted, that student retention. So the principal at Westwood, Chris Gilmore is his name, prioritized commitment of 2 common planning periods for every educator team. And then he also varied 4-hour blocks to open up elective options and split 2-hour blocks for students who are more successful with a check-in type of setup. So different schools approach the schedule in different ways and certainly had different challenges. And I don't have the context of how you guys divide your schedule or what's negotiable or what is not negotiable for you, but you can see, before we get into this, how all these schools really had to think about it. And again, it wasn't a one size fits all. What was important in one school and how they could manage the schedule wasn't the same at another. So now that you've had a chance to see some schedules and consider the priorities that inform them, we're going to again hear from some of our leaders out in the field about some of their thinking for their visions inform the schedule and the trade-offs they had to work through. And again, this, had some ripple effects across different content areas. Sometimes teachers that were not in the model sometimes had questions, and they leveraged that to their advantage. If you're interested, come on in. We have room for more. So it was a way to introduce the model to others, but also to kind of rethink how the time in the day is divided for teaching. So let's again hear from some of these folks.
Our staffing allocations are based on a 1 to 150 ratio. So one teacher should serve 150 kids. And in the traditional model, that's broken down over 5 class periods of 30 students. So I had asked teachers, hey, if we can bump it to 37 kids per class and have just 4 classes, you still serve your 150 kids. It's not more students, but that will give you 2 prep hours. And they would be 2 common prep hours plus a common lunch that they could have. And there was a little apprehension at first. And I said, hey, you need to try it. And I said, if it's not working halfway through, I will change in the middle of the year. I just need you to trust me on this. And so we did, and they were able to use one prep hour as their, grading, bathroom, whatever they needed to do. That second prep hour is not really a true prep hour in the sense of do what you want. The team will either meet to discuss interventions. It's centered around students, and then the other half of that weekly meeting is really pulling kids in from their elective classes, because they are out in their electives when the teams have prep, and you're pulling those kids in. And that's going to be either if you have some absenteeism where kids have to make work up, if you have a group of students that didn't perform well on an assessment, you can run small group instruction during that time. So the team has total autonomy with pulling those kids in. I've seen them pull parents in if there's behavioral issues where the team can meet with the parent and the student. So that's really how we've set the master schedule up for 7th grade. And next year we are going to launch school-wide 7th and 8th grade. And again, those teams are comprised of math, science, social studies, and ELA. Our elective teachers have that traditional 5 classes of 30 students.
Our teachers still carry the same amount of workload and students that anybody else would. And so their classes may be a little larger, but that's how they utilize space differently. They regroup students because depending on the type of instruction or what's going on, I mean, you can have a group of 20, you can have a group of 40.
We've had to have hard conversations with teachers who had ideas for classes that they wanted, or different things in the course catalog they wanted to try. And if it didn't make, in the sense that it didn't have at least 20 students, or I forget where our cutoff was, I think it was 25 anyway.
Yeah.
Whatever it was, if it didn't make, we had to tell them, hey, listen, I'm sorry, we don't have the FTE to make that happen. Yeah. Because we've got to prioritize this again. And for us, it goes back to our why. We've got to prioritize a belonging place for freshman students.
It wasn't as much me as it was me asking the teams, what are you willing? These are the things on the table that are going to be affected. Like, how can we work through this, and what do you see? And so they were very strategic. A trade-off, it didn't feel like a trade-off, because for me, it was giving them a voice, and it meant that I didn't have to make every decision all the time. Instead, it allowed them to really think about, okay, well, what does this do? And because of their flexibility of schedule. So this is something I think administrators often we don't realize, is because when we allow teachers' schedules to be a little bit more flexible, then they can then allow our schedules to be a little bit more flexible, right? And so they're making their student schedules flexible. What that meant was that at 10:15, not all 5 teachers or all 4 teachers have to be in one classroom teaching 26 kids. That means there may be one teacher who's got a little bit of flexibility to leave and go support something that's happening while the other teachers are surrounding the students. So it was a trade-off, but at the end of the day, we still feel like we benefited from it.
So you can see, how some of our principals really had to think through the trade-offs and implementing this model and go back to those priorities. And they weren't always easy decisions. You could see at the high school level, they prioritized that community and belonging to the point where they dipped into students' elective classes and could pull them out. Maybe they'd missed too much classes and they needed to make something up. That's where they did some intervention. But then also having that trust in the educators to have some flexibility in how they use that time was critical for them, because that autonomy is where they began to think about what they needed, really get strategic in how they were using their time. The teachers know what the students they're working with. They want to, prioritize the work, but it's a new way to think about time, honestly. And I think you could see many of them, the principals realized, we would love to provide 40 different options for students for electives, but we can't provide that much breadth of content and go deeper and have personalized learning at the same time. So that's where some of the trade-offs came. So what we consider, what we would like you to think about, and I'm just going to send us into breakout rooms for about 7 minutes to kind of debrief and kind of think through the master scheduling in your own context. You can go back to the strategic application plan that is in the elements doc that I shared earlier, the resource page, but think about where you're going to start with your critical considerations for your master schedules. Is it going to be the elective or special area blocks? Maybe you don't have as much flexibility in how you arrange time within the day, and that's something that needs to be discussed more at the system level so a pilot team can have that flexibility. So let's just jump into breakout rooms for 5 to 7 minutes so you can debrief with each other and kind of process some of your thoughts. And then we'll come back. I'll pull you out so we can get back into the next section where we'll look at creating school and creating flexible learning spaces and looking at the environment and how we're setting up the school environment to meet the model. Any questions? I see something in the chat. Who are the students in the prep hour? Is that the question? Who is with the students in the prep hour? Okay, sorry, misread it. So in prep hours, that's often when our students are at what we call an elective. So they may be at physical education class, they may be at a music class. Art is often an elective at the middle and upper high school level. At the elementary level, the only really special classes they go to outside of their everyday class would be physical education and music here in Arizona. At the high school level, obviously they have more advanced electives and options, but that's where they're leveraging other adults within the school also to be supervising the students so the teachers can have that planning time. So during the physical, they may block physical education and music together so that there's a full hour where the students are away, and that allows the team then to engage. That also means that music and PE teacher has to be able to accommodate all those students. So then you have to think about the adults that are supporting them. That's where the extended team comes into play. So these are things you need to kind of think about and just be, there are going to be stumbling blocks and challenges that you're going to come across because this is going to rub up against, traditional ways we've approached education. And that's okay. We just need to figure a way around it. Okay. All right, so let me stop sharing so I can put us into breakout rooms. So let's take about 5 minutes and just debrief with each other. Take some notes in that resource document in the strategic plan, and I'm going to pull that back up for you so you can have the link. And we'll be back in 5 minutes. All right, everybody's back now. Good. Okay. Hopefully you had a little bit of time to kind of debrief some thoughts that came forward for you. I don't know how the scheduling matches with your context. I'm really anxious to hear from you some things that you'll be thinking about in your schedule. I'm going to touch base with Keith and Marlene afterwards because of time. I want to kind of keep going tonight with our content. So we'll do more of a debrief at a different time because I want to get us into creating those shared and flexible learning spaces. So the next component you really need to think about is, how are we going to set up these learning environments in these teams? What does this look like? How do we manage the students through this? What about younger students? How do they know where to go, when to go? So if you imagine your favorite space to learn and thinking about, what did you love about it? How does it make you feel when you're learning? And how does it contribute best to your learning? I was going to have you put some ideas in the chat, but I'm going to skip that so we can kind of keep going on the content. But this is something you might want to have your teams think about. And as we looked at the learning spaces and people beginning to move into these teams, a question came up of, do I need to completely redo my learning, our school to accomplish this model? We don't have the budget for that, or that isn't something, we have the authority to do. So we wanted to show you that this is being done in a variety of ways, especially looking at, what schools have available in their different contexts. So there's a continuum that we are seeing so far out in the field of shared and flexible learning spaces. And we, being in Arizona, we have a lot of really good Mexican food, given our proximity to Mexico. And so we measure the levels of rethinking a space in chilies, if you will. So the least spicy option is what kind of level 1, where schools are just leveraging the existing spaces that are physically close to one another. And that's one way that they're simply, leverage, just using what they have. And the folks that came to Arizona in March got to see that example, and we'll see some photos of it. The next level is some schools did have some funding in their budgets to invest in maybe low cost furniture or maybe some minor construction. For example, we'll see at one of the schools where they just did some minor construction to put doors between 4 classrooms that were very close to each other. And they placed doors with windows so that they could have more of that community feel and the students could move through the spaces more easily. The next level is from another school, and we'll show you examples of this, I think in Kyrene, where they invested in, this was a school in a little bit of a higher socioeconomic community. And they did have quite of a strong parent community with a lot of good donations. And so they were able actually to invest in higher cost furniture and equipment. And they did some pretty major construction within a school building that they had identified to implement this model. And then there is a school here in the Phoenix area that's completely off the charts. And they were in a position where their school was actually was up to be rebuilt. And that's happening in many of our schools here across the US as technology is advancing and our older school buildings may not be able to always handle all the new wiring and such. So when they're being rebuilt, they actually redesigned their entire school around a teaming model. So we have the continuum. And so let's take a look at what some of this looks like and also listen to some of our leaders on some of what they thought about as they looked at spaces within their buildings as they were creating this model.
When we first started, I would say that the continuum team-based learning environment was at a level 1. And that's, I really wanted it around that IT space. Because if kids want to write, writing is fundamental, it's huge. There's huge deficits when it comes to writing. But there's a lot of other resources that we can tap into for kids to explore and use in conjunction with reading and writing. And that was our IT space. So I basically moved teachers so that they were around that area and they could access that space.
I'll put it this way. We started at level 1, and then as teachers started working, we were able to shift just proximity in general to where they were at least by each other. Because at first, we had our school was, they were portables, but it's no different than academic buildings. But we had a portable that was the English teachers, a portable that was the social studies teachers, a portable that was the math teachers. So that was kind of level 1. But as we started teaming, we moved that around to where we had the teams in or next to each other in portables. So, but we didn't do any construction there. There was nothing beyond that because they were portables. So we actually jumped to like level 3. To where we knocked down walls in all the portables. So we had just larger learning spaces to work together to where we could put 2 or 3 teachers into the same space if needed. And that's kind of where we ended. Level 4 was never really an option for us just based on where we were at. But, in terms of furniture removal, bringing in tables, like all those kind of things happened. Naturally, just by what the teachers and the teams had requested to better their instruction throughout the day.
We kind of got lucky in our first year that we had a remodel in our downstairs of our main building. And so we were able to last minute throw in some garage doors in between classrooms and lab spaces. And then we were able to throw in some sliding glass doors in between classrooms. So we were able to have like some really neat construction / remodel in our first year. But this year, we don't have that.
Yeah, so going into next year, we're trying to double the number of teams we have, but we don't have spaces that allow for flexibility at all. So right now we're trying to figure out where can we have teachers located that can be near each other, and then can we have a bigger space available for them when they want to use a bigger space, that they can maybe, put on a schedule, like when they want to use it. But we actually went down. So last year, I say we were at a level 3, luckily, but now we're at like a 2 or a 1 for going forward.
I would definitely think we were at a level 2. So we have a very old building. It was designed, fortunately, with 4 individual classrooms that were kind of sharing one wooden door with each classroom. And what our district did was they came in and took out the wooden door, and then they put up like storefront doors. So they're glass doors. They're the size of a storefront door, and they can be easily opened or closed to allow that fluidity through the space. And so I think for like an older school building, it was a perfect renovation that is completely allowed us to team in an effective way. I don't think we need a gigantic redesign of a building. This has been exactly what we need, and I think it was somewhat affordable. They also did invest in some flexible seating. So we did get rid of like just the old school wooden desks, and they did purchase some furniture that is easily movable with, some different types of seating and chairs for the students.
So really looking at almost auditing your campus and saying what's being underutilized for space and how can we maximize that space? And that all has to be through the vision of learning as a building site leader. It just can't be, we want to go there because it's a cool space. How does it augment your vision for learning on campus?
So you can see our schools, had a variety of contexts and how they approached it. And they actually are moving among the various levels depending on their pilot year and or the scaling of the model at their site. So the spaces isn't, something really to consider and thinking about how students move through the spaces. We saw some examples of that when we toured some schools here in Arizona. So I want to show you some of the floor plans that, if you will, for some of these schools, so you can get a sense of how they modified their building. So the level 1, again, is just leveraging that existing space that are physically close to each other, and really just kind of working with what you have. And so this is an example of Westwood High School. So they leveraged mostly 4 classrooms that are somewhat next to each other. One they found was a classroom with what we call accordion walls, where they can be pulled in and out. And the use of hallways for smaller group work. So that's how they have accomplished it with the space they have. This is an example from, hold on here. This is from a primary school where we visited earlier this year. And you can see this is actually photographs I took. And you can see this is a first, second grade combo, I believe. And these are 4 of the existing rooms. The teachers are all using these rooms together. There's one room that's been identified for more independent work. You can see they brought in some couches, maybe from a thrift store that they've picked up. You can see that they're leveraging more tables in the classroom, and this is common in our primary classrooms. They typically don't have desks. They have more table groupings. You can see a third classroom that was designed for small group work, and there's various small tables. You can see a teacher in the back working with the group. I actually happened to step in on these 2 little girls. They were both English language learners, and they were independently working on a program online. So they're leveraging technology as another member of the team. And they could tell me exactly what they were working on, what the objective of the lesson was, and they were working together. The girl on the left was more proficient in English than the girl on the right, so she was also kind of guiding her. And then you can see in the 4th classroom where there was a lot of small group working happening. So this is just 4 classrooms that one would have been assigned to each teacher at the grade. and how they've leveraged the space. Most of the students right now, and when we were there, were in this one room. You could see this room had a lot of group work set up, but only a few students. And that may have been due to the students' needs. These may be students that need more quiet space, may need more intense instruction, and they wanted to give them that kind of quiet. Maybe there were some behavior issues that they were taking into account. So you can see that technology is being leveraged much more strategically, as well as the space. So at a little bit higher level, this is Stevenson Elementary. And again, this is one of the schools that was able to put in those glass doors. So you can see that they have designed their space similar to this, the one I just showed you, but this is where they added some light construction to add doors that would link all 4 spaces together, because otherwise students would have to walk all the way out and around, to get to the other rooms. And again, you can see they have the space set up for different learning configurations depending on the room, but this is all with the furniture that's already at the school. Again, the only thing that I think that would be maybe brought in was maybe there was some extra money they used to buy a few couches from a thrift store. They put a cover on it so they were, clean and safe for the kids to be cleaned. But that's how they accomplished it, with just a very, light investment in some light construction. Level 3, this is the Kyrene de la Masnitas Innovation Academy. And this was one of the schools that I was talking about earlier that was in maybe a more affluent area. And they actually redid a portion of the school to kind of have this separate space where they began to pilot it. So, and there are more pictures you can see on the website from these sites, but this is a higher level example. And again, this is the floor plan for how they design this space. And you can see there's even, a teacher workspace within here. There's space for couches, materials. So they actually really redesigned. They have spaces for the bathrooms to be located for the students, so they don't have to travel that far. Again, they were, they had the money and the resources to take it to this level. Finally, Creighton Academy, which is in another school district. It's not in the Mesa School District where we visited. This was a school that had entire school redesign, and they redesigned their school around teaming. So their floor plan and of their school is at another level. So they had a complete rebuild with teaming in mind. They worked a lot with the community design, the building. They have few doors, they have low walls and lots of zones for large group, quiet spaces, labs, and informal spaces. And they actually are even leveraging places like stairs. They call these conversation stairs, where they can bring the students in a large group and they can sit on the stairs, and then the teacher can, work from the bottom floor and work with the students that way. So just some really dynamic options. But again, this doesn't have to be an entire school redesign. These are just the gamut of what we're seeing out there. So as you're looking at your planning considerations for creating shared spaces across teaming, you want to think about, how you're going to envision the learning space will enhance the teaching and learning. I think it was the principal from the middle school that was, really saying teachers had to justify why they wanted this space. It couldn't be, or this room. It couldn't just because it was the nice room, or it had maybe, more convenient technology. They had to justify pedagogically and academically why this would enhance the learning. You also want to think about identifying those shared common spaces that teams can access, or if may need to be where they can schedule to access, like they were talking about at the high school level. As they're scaling the model, they're realizing, oh, their pilot team got a really nice learning environment. They were, almost at a level 3. And now as they're scaling, they were dropping back. So they have to rethink things. You need to identify instructional space for each core educator team, and then thinking about the furniture and equipment that would be needed in that instructional model. And also, we don't have it on here, but also thinking about how technology plays into things. You could see one principal really leveraged where technology was located in the building and leverage that space for the pilot team. So again, you've got the continuum. We have examples and photos from all these schools on the website that you can also explore. But in your strategic plan, there is place for you to think about, what are the spaces available to your launching team? So thinking about, and I'd actually kind of think on two levels, our launching team, and then what next? Because that's going to be the next question. You don't want to have those, maybe some have a better environment than others because of when they started. I don't know, that could cause some issues. And then what is your plan for sharing or reconfiguring these learning spaces in a way that is responsive to both the task and the need? How will students and educators move across the spaces? You need to think, especially with the little ones. And when we, I think later in the presentation, there's some photos I actually took in the elementary classrooms where they have teacher-made signs that were made with students on how the students were to move from classroom to classroom. Because the little ones they just need to be retrained, and it's just once that they need to figure it out, but then it can be reapplied from year to year. And then what are some ways you might provide choice to learners in terms of where they work, depending on the task? And you could see that some of the rooms were built for more independent work with couches, single tables, different ways to encourage students to think about how they best learn. So the strategic plan is available. I'm going to keep moving us forward if that's okay, so that we can get into our next section on creating communication structures that support teams, if that's okay. We'll take a little bit of time to debrief after that one. Okay, so let's keep moving along. And as we're thinking about the different types of school elements and or team level elements, we're going back to that, those elements we looked at the very beginning of the season of this evening, whether it's the teaming or the school level. And it's really going to be a combination in creating these structures between looking at that innovators approach, the change management and the team resources that you're thinking about from your level as principals, but also kind of how that's cycling with the team level elements where they're in these differentiated roles, the team enabled deeper learning, and the personalized learning. And we're creating systems and structures that enable teams to really think through how they're going to change. And you want to give that ownership to the teams, and also to let them know that you're going to be right there behind them. And again, I can't emphasize enough, there's going to be some failures, and that's okay. Those are learning opportunities. And we just need to kind of reframe for the community as well, for the teams, that that is part of the process. So some of the things that you want to think about in teaming routines and procedures that have come up that we've realized are, attendance, where students put their personal belongings, jobs that we used to have within our classroom. When I taught, I always had someone that was the line leader, and someone that could, hand out the bathroom pass, and all those little jobs, they need to be rethought, in the bigger context, where eating and drinking takes place in the learning space. When are students able to leave the classroom? In the US, we also do quite a few drills for emergencies. We always do fire drills, and now because of our glorious context here in the United States, we have a lot of other drills for shooters and different things, but those all need to be thought about, as far as how the team is going to manage this, how you're going to manage and make sure students are safe, and then also thinking about the communication with the team and then with the families. So there's a lot to kind of think through, and we do have quite a few resources in our resource page to provide you with insight on how to continue to do that. But one of the things we want to focus today on is how to really create that shared roster, and then thinking about creating data systems and routines. So most of the elements are grounded in sharing that roster of students in a way that really allows for the students to be with the teachers at the same time. So that's something to first consider. And then also thinking with the teachers, what data are they collecting within their teaching to rethink about how students are being grouped and revised within the classroom, so that the instruction and the student learning is driving the next day's instruction. And that takes our team's time to get to, but that's the goal of where we want to go with them. So when we look at creating a shared roster of students, we really want to think about where is that shared responsibility coming in. And so a critical element in the team level elements is that we've talked about before is the shared responsibility of a single roster of students. This is foundational, and this is somewhat new for teachers because they're used to thinking about my students, my classroom, and we're shifting to our students and our work together. And that is a bit of a shift for that core team. But as we talked about earlier, the core team has to at least have 2 professional educators who share that responsibility. And then we also want to think about considerations for creating a shared roster of students. Some of our schools started, you could see, at a grade level, and then by the second year, they'd move to multi-grade levels because they started to look at students' needs, their academic progression, and then how they could better put them together in groups that made sense for the teachers that were coming around them. And so this took, a lot of thought in how they were really rethinking how students were organized across the school, the learning management systems in our schools, the data that we collect, all the attendance, everything, grades had to be rethought. That had to be rethought with our front office staff who communicate to the public and the parents coming in, and then also for our attendance, so that we could be in, a lot of our funding here in the US is tied to attendance as well as it's the law student, the students go to school. So all of these really came into play in really unique ways and things that need to be thought about. These are kind of the periphery that begin to really impact that support for the team. So I'm not sure how relevant this is for your context, but this is an example of a learning management system in the US called Synergy. And this is used quite heavily here in Arizona. So there was some consistency for our schools. But just to give you a sense in some of the things we had to look at, in the Synergy learning management system, they really had to rethink how they were assigning teachers within the data system so that all of the grades that were input into the online system could be matched to the right students in the right context. So you can see here that they used the co-teacher function, which happened to be in this LMS system, to tag teachers for a shared roster of students. This allowed all the teachers to have access to the student information, which parent information, health information, previous grade, any special education needs, et cetera, are all kept within these learning management systems. So that's one way that they had to, rethink the shared roster. There was a lot that had to be thought through with these learning management systems they're using here in the United States. I'm not sure what you have, if you have similar systems in your schools, but this is also something to consider how that technology is tracking the students within the school. At another example, at the elementary school, there was really, they also used the Synergy learning management system. But in year 1, they put all of the kids on the team's roster. I think it was around 100 kids or so. And they were able to tag all the other teachers to be part of the team. And they realized in that year there was a lot of issues in terms of how they were able to do attendance. And then they shifted to the homeroom function. And so there was a lot of work they went through within the management system to really think about it. But they also had to think about that mindset shift, which I just spoke about, going to our kids. And this is really a core piece for teachers. And I experienced this myself. These were my students in my classroom. I was the teacher and kind of the mom, if you will, and really helping teachers to kind of step out of that mindset and thinking through how we are working together. Other considerations to think about, you might need to think about in your context is, how are you engaging in the union, the labor groups, conversations? We had to really think through that. And in fact, I'm not sure if Carol shared when you guys were here, but our largest teachers union in the United States, the American Federation Teachers Union is looking at actually starting a cohort of this model. So we have had discussions at the state level and the national level with the teachers unions, and they've actually, in our context, have found that this is an exciting model that they really think will keep teachers in the field. But we wanted to make sure and bridge that with them so that they were partners with us and that the model didn't get misunderstood as maybe we were bringing back the 70s with open classrooms, and we were trying to drive teachers out of the profession. That we took time to really work with them. I know from working with some of you when you were here in March, you also do a lot with job sharing, which I think is another way to, another, factor you're going to need to think about, how you're sharing students when teachers are job sharing. I think it's just going to challenge us to rethink some of these subtleties and modify as we go and we learn. So when we think about creating a shared data systems and routines, that's also another level of the team's work together. And again, you could see the teachers are moving students in some of those instructional shifts and practices when we were looking at the deeper and personalized learning. So data collection is really important at the classroom level for teachers to begin to really dive in. And this actually, for a lot of our teachers, made the data collection we've been doing in the United States make a lot more sense for them, because in the past, they were basically collecting the data and handing it off to specialists at the school who would then give them the information back. And in this model, they're actually working with the data more themselves. But I hope you got a chance to begin to kind of think about some of those shared data systems. And we're going to wrap up this evening with our last section on creating communication structures that support teams. So we've just got one more section to go, and then you'll have the full picture. So let's wrap it up. So as you're thinking about communication and creating communication that really supports the teams, this is a little bit different in thinking about the different types of communication you really need to think about. School leaders are used to kind of being the ones that have the answer, whether it's a solution in a box of curriculum that someone has delivered to our school and says, this is going to solve all the literacy problems going forward, or the answers in the binder. Here, all the things we are doing together we're doing them together. And so the work is different and the communication is different. As principals, you aren't going to give all the answers. You're going to be walking alongside your teams, figuring it out together. And that's a little bit of a different role to take. It's a little bit more vulnerable. And that's something you just need to think through. So your communication with the team needs to be, needs to think about the culture and the structure so that you can provide the team with communication that will really support them and help them move forward. So it's taking on a bit of a different role. It's a bit of a vulnerable situation where they may come to you and want you to solve something, and you may not have the answer, and you may need to step into a collaborative role with the team to kind of rethink it together. So Amy Edmondson's work really talks about the concept of psychological safety, and that's a shared belief held by members of a team that it is safe for interpersonal risk-taking. And this is critical in this work, especially in your pilot teams. And like I've said, they need to know that failure is going to be part, or challenges as much as successes are going to be part of that first year. It's not going to be a disaster, but they are going to be within what we call maybe a fishbowl, where a lot of people are watching what they're doing. Others might be remarking on it, or, not as informed and perhaps a bit put off that this is occurring. So you need to think about how you're really creating that environment for that team to debrief and have that psychological safety with each other. So Randy Malrain, one of our principals, really talked about this, of creating this culture of psychological safety, and described as important. And in fact, Google has done a lot around psychological safety. And if we were to pick one thing to focus on from this study that I'm sharing here, psychological safety has the highest impact on team effectiveness. So we've included some resources about psychological safety in the one pager, that handout, that resource, because we've learned from our leaders in the schools that it's a critical piece of the culture you create and communicate to help make this work successful. And so that's just a quote here from Randy. But let's just take a quick look at some of our other leaders out in the field and look at how they've addressed this psychological safety and creating those communication structures of support. They had to rethink some things, and they'll share with you what they learned.
it starts with your vision, and you have to have a clear vision, and they have to understand that vision. And then after that, they have to understand that they know you trust. And I said, if we do the same thing all the time, then I'm super disappointed, because right now we're not crushing it in education. So we have to fail forward. It's our greatest teacher is failure. And I want to see you fail, tongue in cheek. I want to see you fail by trying to innovate, rethink things, reimagine education. And those teams have to know that you trust in them. Failure is okay. And I will provide any resource that you need. And you have agency to live into this vision that you have as a principal or anybody that's launching teams.
There wasn't a roadmap. We just started with these baseline ideas and navigated and designed our school together. And some things we failed, right? And we just failed forward, and some things went great, and that continues to happen. And so I think for leaders, just knowing that in order to make something like this work, you have to have a spirit of innovation. You have to come. I mean, the conference is a perfect example. Like, we got into this work, it was like, I don't know. How do we do conferences? Let's sit down. Let's try this. I don't know. How are we going to communicate with families? How will families know who to contact for information about how their child's doing? Like, every step of the way, that has been kind of the mind frame I've needed to have as a leader. And teachers sometimes want you to say, how does this look? Tell me the steps it will take. And so I think that's why it's so important to have that strong team up front helping navigate some of those things, people that you can trust and learn and grow with, and then can help lead other teams through to navigate some of those challenges.
We had designed for them to be together as a team very intentionally. They also were the team of individuals who had initially, when we rolled out project-based learning at our school, those were the ones whose hands went up right away. So I knew they had an innovator mindset. They were really wanting to take risks and willing to take risks without worrying too much about failing. They were okay with that idea of failure as a part of their learning. And they had shown as well their data, student data in terms of achievement. Had continuously shown that their students were learning and growing, and they just seemed to have what was needed for us to start something so new and so unknown.
So as you're the communication of your vision to specific audience is going to be different depending on who you're thinking about with this model. But the first piece we want you to think about going back to that why. That's how we started with it. And so if you want to take a deeper dive into the why, I will also share the PowerPoint I did with the Saxion team that came in March. If you'd like to go into some of Simon Sinek's work, he does a lot of really interesting work around the power of why. And I will drop his name in the chat or send it after. But he's actually a really great resource. But you really want to go back to that, what are you trying to improve? Going back to those goals that you're setting for that pilot year. And then share that information about your specific context that informs the why. Share the permission to fail and learn. Share what this change will look like for the next year. What role will people play? What is the timeline? And what are the intended outcomes? So a lot of our leaders really grounded it back in the why. Why are we doing this? And that really helped the educators and the pilot team in those, more challenging times. Remember, this is where we're going, what we're trying to do. And as we get there, the road may not be a straight line. We may have to take some twists and turns as we get along the way. So thinking about that, how are you communicating with your teachers and educator teams? As you begin to launch teams, it's critical to think about how you communicate to both the teachers who are engaging in a team-based model and the teachers who are not. You have to think about both, because there may be some hurt feelings. Why wasn't I included? Why not me? Or I don't want to do that. I'm not going to ever do that. So the communication on both sides is critical. To those who are implementing the model, that messaging around innovation and learning is particularly critical as a way to give feedback to you as the leader of this work so that you can continue to iterate on what the teaming looks like. So you need to create that structure where your teachers can give you feedback, positive and negative, that you can take and adjust and work with them. For those who are not yet doing the teaming-based model, you want to consider how you're communicating the progress, what is happening with the teams, its successes, as well as its challenges. And maybe, you know, getting teachers to come observe, to give informal feedback, bringing them into the model. It shouldn't be separate necessarily. You'll know your teachers and your context, but there has to be consideration to who's doing it and who's not, and especially for the ones who are not implementing in that first year. How are you communicating what's going on? Whether you bring that pilot team to speak with the teacher community, you know, periodically through the year so they can share what they're doing, or you set up ways for them to observe. Maybe it's structured with you along so that you can help refine and guide their feedback. So these are all things to consider. Thinking about the school community. How are you communicating this to leadership within your school district? I don't think that is as big a problem because we're coming into this as a group, but also the peer school leaders and then the overall community, including those you want to bring in for educator involvement. You know, are you beginning to reach out to some of those strategic community partners and beginning to get them familiar with how they may be part of the model? So these are also communication strategies to consider. And then similarly, communicating, hold on, I'm on the wrong, with families is critical. So how are you going to, you know, communicate to families before the school year begins? How are they going to be able to ask questions? Thinking about, you know, what is the overall, maybe you're sharing the overall vision and goal and having them help come in and look at some of the data that's coming along. These are all key considerations. And, you know, you're going to want to go back to some of your change management literature. My go-to is Heifetz. I really appreciate his look at leadership, but think about, you know, how you're communicating to families and how you might bring them into the fold. I have found in many of the reforms I have worked on, sometimes bringing the most negative people about the reform into the planning helps, because they then get to give feedback in an appropriate way, but they are also part of the implementation too. So it kind of tones down their critique. So those are just things to consider as you're thinking about the different levels of communication. I know a lot of our schools, when they were piloting the model, they had a parent-teacher night very early in the year, and even before the school year started, to kind of talk through so that everybody was just made aware, and that tendency for gossip and, you know, critique could be managed and mitigated. And so consider with which audience do you feel you need to, most shift your communications and why. And that's something you're going to have to think about in your context. At some of your schools, it may be the parent community. At other schools, it may be more the teacher community. It'll be different from context to context. But you need to kind of think about how you're promoting those mind shifts, and also making sure to communicate what's coming next, what's being learned, what are the successes, and what are the pieces you've learned to work from. And so there we are. Now what? You are on your way to starting your own next education workforce models, your Anders Organisation. But now what? Let's take just one last glimpse from our leaders as we send you off on your way. But you have made it to the end of the Launchpad, all 6 sessions in one sitting. And so let's just take one last look from our leaders, and then we'll wrap up from there.
We're a team
of distributed expertise.
Marcy's really, really good at some things that I am not good at. And most everything I'm good at, she's also good at.
Stop it.
So, no, but seriously, we're a team.
Yes.
And the ability to build this out as a team is huge, because I have blind spots, she has blind spots, I have different connections with different teachers, and she has connections. And so the teaming at the top, it just trickles down in a really huge way. So any way that you can try to team together and have a team of administrators, I don't think it has to be bigger than 2, personally. Because once you get a third one, I'm just kidding. Even 3, but a teaming model for administration, I think the principles and ideas just trickle down into the teams with the teachers and students.
Yeah, that's exactly what I was going to say. When you have a team of distributed expertise, I mean, that's what our admin team is also. So we're working on teaching and learning, and especially FAST teams. Our whys are in line, and so are, like, we value the same things. So if he makes a decision, I'm pretty much always going to be good with it, and vice versa. But really having both of us to do this work has been a game changer. Yep. I think I said that before.
Totally. No, it has.
Talk with people. The hardest thing for me is, I grew up in the system, and I have to unlearn a system, which is very challenging. And there's some people that have tremendous innovative ideas. And so as I started looking to develop this, I just went and talked with people. I said, can I visit? Can I ask questions? Can I see it? And similar to this, like, what are struggles that you've had? What are some of your successes? And then I had to, because there's so many different models, and I had to make it fit for my vision at my school and the personnel that I had at that time.
We talk a lot about the teams of educators and their distributive expertise when we launch, but I also think it's important as an administrator to always remember, like, how are we going to support that team? So depending on who are those other adults on campus that are part of that leadership, is it an assistant principal? Is it instructional coaches? Because the principal can't always be there to support the team. So really making sure that there's a clear plan on how you're going to support them. And so for me, I knew we had a schedule between me and my title and instructional coach. We really focused on creating a schedule to make sure one of us was always at their meetings, not as a gotcha, but more as a, we are here to support you. We realize how hard this is, and you're doing something no one else is doing. So what do you need? And so we would always go in, and we would never leave their meetings without saying, what do you need from us? How can we support you? And I think that I don't want to assume, I think everybody knows that, but I think it's to be really intentional when you're launching a team that they need that addition. They need a little extra love. And I told the rest of the teams that too. They're piloting. You're going to see things that they're going to get right now that they need that not everybody else needs. It's just what it is. If you want to pilot and get these things, guess what? Next year will be your turn.
When you're hiring, when you are creating teams, find the right people, and then you kind of work from there. Because if you don't have the right people, it's not going to be sustainable. We found the right people at Riverview that started small and grew to a full high school team. And here at Skyline, we have started with the people who have self-selected to be part of this work. And we're going to provide them all the support in the world to make sure that they are successful, because they become a walking, marketing firm for what we're doing.
One of the things I had done, which was so important, was take this team and visit different schools. And they weren't schools necessarily doing this exact work, but they were schools doing innovative things. They were schools that had a more deeper personalized learning. And so by doing some of that and dreaming together, it was an important step for that first team to really feel bought in to what we were doing. I think another advice I would have for leaders is that there would be points along the way where things weren't going exactly like how I envisioned that they would go, and trusting that that was part of the process, and then being bold enough to have those conversations and say, okay, team that's doing this really great innovative things. It's just not like exactly going as we would hope. So why is that? What do we need to do about it? And just being really vulnerable and honest with your teams and trusting them is important, but also selecting those right people, because if you don't have skilled people helping navigate the work, then it's it's not going to go well. And the idea is if it goes well, they are your evangelists. They are the ones that are helping spread the work because it's going well with your own students on your campus. And so I think those are some of the things that I typically talk to the leaders just entering the work on. Doing some of that prep work before even launching with that team is so important.
So hopefully you got some good advice there from our colleagues that have been leading the way here in Arizona. And that really wraps up the training. I know we went just a little bit over time and it's late there. Any questions or thoughts as we kind of finish up here this evening? I know it's late, and so I will let you guys go soon, but thank you so much for taking time this evening to join our Accelerator Launchpad. I will be sharing all the slides with you so that you can also share this information with your teachers and your teams. I'm also available via email, and I'll put my email here in the chat. If you have any questions that come up after, maybe in the shower tomorrow, I always have good ideas in the shower, or something comes up, you feel free to email me. I also dropped a few books in the chat that I have used that I don't know if you're familiar with them, but they are also quite helpful. Simon Sinek, The Power of Why. We worked through his work with the group that came here in March. But I'd recommend his work. Marcus Buckingham does a lot of really good work in strength-based leadership. It's a little bit older work, but thinking about the strengths you have and who can complement your strengths is a really, I think, important concept he brings up. And then there's another book, I couldn't remember the first name of the author, but it's Immunity to Change by, the last name's Keegan, I know that for sure. And he talks about helping people in the process of change, not as you add to your plate of things to do, you need to learn what to take off and think through that. So those are just a few resources I also use in my work around change, if that's helpful for you. But again, I will let you go. My email is in the chat. If anyone wants to stick around and chat, I'm happy to do so. But if you need to get to your families, I very much understand. And I look forward to working with everyone again in August. We will run an institute for the teachers, launching the teams, which will be really directed, specifically at some things they need to be thinking about and learning together. There is an institute that's available online at ASU in July, but I think the timing didn't work out so well with the holidays in your context. So we will follow up soon with the institute, and I will be following up to learn more as you begin the implementation. Good night. Have a good sleep. Thank you for everyone for your well wishes. So nice to see everyone. Big hug.
Thank you, Anne, also for your time.
Oh, my pleasure. My pleasure. And I'll also send the recording.
Oh, yes. Thank you.
Please let me know if there's anything I need to do. I think you and Marlene are going to connect, correct?